Hello, welcome to this discussion about how the EU Bank can support green energy and a low-carbon future. I'm Matteo Maggiore, I'm the Head of Communication of the European Investment Bank, and I am with Andrew McDowell, the Vice President in charge of lending to the energy sector with the European Investment Bank. We're in Luxembourg at the EIB headquarters. For those of you who don't know us very well, the EIB is a publicly owned bank owned by the government of the member states of the European Union. As such, it is not driven by profit, but more by the pursuit of policy goals. This is the reason why we care so much about what our stakeholders and citizens think, especially about things that matter to them a lot. And climate and energy are certainly fall under that category. We know because we read the newspapers, and we know because we went out and asked them. We ran a survey that showed us that about 78% of European citizens care very, very much and are frightened by climate change. And energy matters because we need it and because we are concerned about the impact it has on the environment and on climate. So this conversation takes part as part of a consultation that we've started running in February about the way we're going to change the criteria under which we do lending in the energy sector. We hope it will help you get an insight into how we lend to the energy sector and how we take account of the implications on the environment and for climate. Andrew, what about this consultation? What can people expect from it?
Well, the first thing is to thank everybody who has made a submission into our consultation process, which closed last Friday. And we have literally had hundreds of submissions, which is a dramatic increase in the number of submissions that we had in previous consultation processes. And I think it really does echo what you've already said, which is obviously the growing interest in the role of the bank in financing the energy transformation and the growing interest that people have more generally in the energy sector. What people can expect now is, first of all, an acknowledgement of any submissions that they've made. So in the coming weeks, after we've documented every submission, filed it, made sure it's properly registered and in the right order and so on, people will get a formal acknowledgement. We will formally publish all of the submissions that have been received by the bank so that you will be able to see, everybody will be able to see what the bank has received in this consultation process. We'll then prepare, obviously internally within the bank, we'll start to prepare draft policies consistent with the submissions received and the issues raised, how the bank proposes to address those. They'll be considered, first of all, by the bank's internal management committee, but ultimately by the board of directors of the bank, where we hope to have a first discussion at a board working group in July, and we aim to finalise a new policy in the third quarter of the year. Once we've finalised a new policy, we will also then publish what we call a consultation matrix, which will show how the policy addresses the issues that have been raised by people in the consultation process, how the final policy addresses the submissions. I think obviously this will be a challenge in addressing all the issues, but I think the proof of the value of this process is in the fact that we did the same thing 6 years ago. We had a consultation on our energy policies in 2013. What it produced was a reprioritization of the bank's lending into the climate action, renewable energy and energy efficiency sectors. And that has been reflected since in the actual lending policies of the bank. So since that 2013 consultation process, 80% of our lending has been for the clean energy transition. Prior to that, in the previous decade, it was about half of that. So the proof of the pudding is in the actual change in our lending priorities as a result of what people asked for. And that's what we aim to deliver again. We aim to respond to the concerns that stakeholders have made with our decisions, operation by operation, over the coming years.
What we're trying to do today is to inject, of course, it's too early to talk about the outcome of the consultation per se, but we do know that there are a number of questions that have been added to the list of questions that the bank came up with. And we would like to go through some of these. We've gathered them through Twitter, and you have submitted several of these. And so what we're going to do is go through the main ones that we have tried to group, starting perhaps with a question from Alex Dukas that we already dealt with in part through Twitter, but we will go through it again because it is an important question. And it is about the Commission's long-term strategy and gas. All the scenarios that the Commission comes up with say that gas will decrease its importance as an energy carrier in the future. So why is the EIB still financing gas? And shouldn't we say that we will not do it anymore?
Well, I mean, this is going to be one of the key issues, obviously, of the review of the bank's energy lending policies, and is our future relationship with the gas sector. As Alex points out, we have continued to finance gas infrastructure projects mainly in recent years, and the logic behind that has been twofold, essentially, is that gas has continued to provide a form of energy security to European citizens. Obviously, we need energy, obviously, to keep the lights on and obviously keep our homes and workplaces heated and powered. But we've also financed gas because it has been a reliable backup source of power for intermittent renewable energy, such as wind and solar. Obviously, wind and solar are the clean energies, but aren't always available to us given climatic conditions. The future we're going to need to reconsider because obviously that has been a sufficient logic for us to finance gas in the past. But the question before us now is, as Alex has said, if in 30, 40 years' time gas is going to play a much more diminished role in our energy needs, then what should we do now in terms of the decisions we make in financing gas infrastructure? This is a very careful balancing act that we're going to need to reflect on. In some parts of Europe, gas infrastructure is already very well developed, and there may not be a huge demand for more gas infrastructure. In other parts of Europe, they don't have the same level of gas infrastructure. They're very vulnerable in terms of very dependent on perhaps one source of supply. And they may need, for security of supply reasons, additional infrastructures. And the role of the bank in helping to finance those infrastructures is something we're going to need to consider very carefully. There's another issue we need to consider in the future as well when it comes to gas infrastructure is, could it be that in the future new forms of clean gas use the existing gas infrastructure that we've built up in Europe? So, for example, hydrogen, or a synthetic methane, or indeed biogas as a byproduct of agricultural activity. Could these clean forms of gas, which don't have the same emissions problem as methane that we extract from under the sea or from under the ground, could they play a role in providing for our energy needs? In which case, the infrastructure that we've built up can be put to good use, but in an environmentally sustainable way. And these are the type of questions that we've asked in the consultation process. We've got a lot of submissions on this issue from both industry and environmental groups, and we're going to need to work our way through those issues now over the coming weeks.
I mean, clearly, the EIB is a very large investor, and therefore it bears a certain responsibility, a certain special responsibility in these terms. But how is the responsibility for evolving these networks and these sources of gas, of energy spread out again among the players and actors in the energy field?
Well, I mean, clearly everybody's got a responsibility in this regard. As a bank, we're quite, in some ways, downstream from a lot of the decisions that are taken. We tend to finance projects when they've already been well prepared and costed and within a policy framework that's been agreed by politicians. for us to get more projects to finance to drive the clean energy transition, whether that be in renewables or in energy efficiency or indeed in other areas. Obviously, we need policy frameworks that make those investments bankable, that make those investments attractive to promoters and financiers. That means, obviously, we've got to talk to a wide group of stakeholders who want to understand our views about what makes a project bankable, which is why our relationship with the Member States and the European Commission is vital in terms of us providing constant feedback as to the difficulties certain energy projects have in getting financing, what makes it difficult to bank a clean energy project. But we need to talk to industry, we need to talk to environmental stakeholders, we need to talk to citizens. Because everybody's got a responsibility in this particular area. What we get to finance at the end of the day is dependent on the decisions made by thousands of stakeholders.
There is a question that recurs and actually seems very much a $60,000 question, which is, why do we still finance fossil fuels at all? Shouldn't we, since fossil fuels have been recognized as being the key culprit for energy emissions, why do we still, as a public bank, finance fossil fuels at all?
Well, let's put this into context now. First of all, as I've mentioned, 80% of all our energy-related financing since the last review of our energy lending policies in 2013 has been for clean energy, mainly renewables, and also an increasing amount towards energy efficiency. And I expect that proportion to grow, to continue to grow into the future. When you say we continue to finance fossil fuels, effectively what we have financed in the last 6 years related to fossil fuels is gas infrastructure. We haven't financed coal extraction in 25 years. We haven't financed a coal-fired power generation in well over a decade. And even in terms of gas-fired generation, it's increasingly rare and has to be at the highest emission standards. It effectively has to be a combined heat and power plant in order to meet our eligibility requirements. So our financing related to fossil fuels is primarily about gas infrastructure, the point we already discussed. And indeed, an awful lot of that financing has simply been about the repair of that infrastructure, stopping leaks from our existing gas infrastructure of methane into the atmosphere. And we know methane is a very powerful greenhouse gas. So even that financing had a climate logic all of its own. But it's a valid question as to whether that is the right strategy for the future. What we have said in the consultation process is, what we have asked the industry is, tell us what your decarbonisation strategy is for the gas sector. Tell us how the gas sector is going to play a role in meeting the Paris targets. Tell us more about hydrogen. Tell us more about biogas. Tell us more about synthetic methane. Tell us how that is going to be available in the future, and the project pipeline that's coming, and the role that's going to play in the gas infrastructure of the future. So that's what we want to hear, because it is clear that, as we move into the 2020s and 2030s, the role of gas is going to diminish in the energy mix, consistent with the Paris climate targets, and that's got to be reflected in our own energy lending priorities.
You mentioned the Paris targets. Are we on track to achieve those targets?
Clearly not. Obviously, like everybody, I'm following on a regular basis the reporting from the United Nations, from the International Energy Association, and what we're hearing is a real wake-up call that some of the progress we thought we were making a couple of years ago in delinking economic growth from energy consumption and energy-related emissions, that's begun to weaken again. So we're now seeing renewed growth in energy-related emissions as a result of global economic growth in 2018. This was the main outcome of the International Energy Agency report only a number of days ago. That's a wake-up call. So it's quite clear that, yes, we're all making changes, including, as I said, the bank. The bank has made huge changes in the profile of its not just its energy lending, but its lending more generally to finance Paris-consistent projects. But it's also clear we need to do an awful lot more, that what we've achieved so far is not enough, and there's still difficult questions we need to ask ourselves. For example, yes, we've increased the amount we've done for lending into the energy efficiency sector in recent years. In fact, we've quadrupled our lending into that sector. We're now financing about 4 billion a year in energy efficiency projects. But if you look at the numbers just published by the European Commission for the pathway to net zero emissions for Europe by 2050, it shows we need to be, in Europe as a whole, we need to be financing about 200 billion a year of retrofit to refit existing buildings across Europe to meet modern energy efficiency requirements. So what we're doing at the moment collectively is only a drop of the ocean compared to what's going to be required over the next decade. And this is again one of the questions we ask in the consultation process. How can we work with others to do more? Because none of us individually is going to be able to deal with the financing requirements on that scale. How can we work with others and combine our forces in order to make a difference in that particular area?
Mm-hmm. These are the questions that we ask of ourselves. Of course, we're giving people the chance of coming up with more questions. And one of the questions that comes up is, how do we know that we're making good progress at all? How do we measure that we're actually making things better?
Well, I mean, as a bank, we're very transparent in every project that we finance. We publish a environmental and social data sheet in advance of board approval of every project for all the inspection of all stakeholders. We have a register on our website that for the vast majority of projects, and indeed for any project that has a significant energy related dimension, that has a carbon footprint analysis. So in other words, the impact in carbon emissions of that project against a counterfactual, against a baseline is assessed and published in advance. Of course, we don't just do this before we finance projects. We also then go back after project completion, and a year after a project has actually been completed. So if we've created a finance creation of a metro or a bridge or a wind, an offshore wind generating station, we go back a year after completion to measure the final result against our initial expectations, and we compare the two. And that's available for everybody to see on the website. We also aggregate that data on an annual basis, and we publish the combined impact of the bank when it comes to environmental and social and economic impacts in two publications called our 3PA and REM. All of these are available on our website. But again, we ask the question in the consultation process, what more can we do? Can we become more transparent? Is there more data that's available to us that our stakeholders would like to see? And that's something we're happy to consider.
I think we've come to the end of the questions that we'd received in advance of this conversation via Twitter from you watching now. Just to remind people who might have picked up at this point, the next step in which people at large, stakeholders, citizens will be involved in terms of the consultation, when will it be?
Well, I mean, again, we'll go through. People will obviously get an acknowledgement that they've made a submission. Those submissions will be published in the coming weeks. We will then publish a draft new set of energy lending policies on our website in advance of finalisation by our board of directors, probably in the third quarter of this year, so that people will be able to see before a final decision is made as to what the proposal from the management of the bank to our board of directors will be in terms of changes to our energy lending policies. Once the board of directors approve that change, we will then publish the policy, the final policy, and we will also publish what we call a consultation matrix, which shows how that policy deals with all the various issues that have been raised during the consultation process. And so we're very grateful for everybody who's taken the time to make a submission, and we're working very hard to reflect those submissions and the issues raised now in the new set of energy lending policies.
Thank you very much, Andrew McDowell, Vice President in charge of energy lending for the European Investment Bank. And thank you very much if you have contributed to the consultation on the review of the energy lending policy of the EU Bank. We're very grateful, and goodbye. Thank you very much.